Canadian Hole Incident. On 3rd July 1978, John Gerber and 4 friends entered a Canadian hole in West Virginia. Gerber was 23 years old and an experienced spelunker. The cave entrance had 5 separate pits requiring technical rope work. After 9 hours underground, they began their exit at 9:30 p.m. They reached the 3rd pit. At 30 feet up, there was a narrow crevice in the rock. Gerber volunteered to go first. He started climbing, but at 30 feet, the crevice was narrower than expected. His chest jumar kept catching on the narrow walls. He was stuck, suspended 30 feet above his friends. After 20 minutes of struggling, he decided to rappel back down, and he needed a knife to cut the sling and reposition his device. Nobody had a knife. Gerber used his carbide lamp flame to burn through the webbing. Suddenly, he dropped about a foot when the sling gave way. They heard him say, "I can't breathe." He went still, hanging limp on the rope. When Gerber dropped, his helmet caught in the crack. The helmet's chin strap became a noose, strangling him. He couldn't reach up to unfasten it. 20 minutes passed before another member could reach him. They found Gerber unconscious with the chin strap tight across his throat. They freed him and lowered him to the floor. They tried CPR, but Gerber had been without oxygen too long. Cave explorers assembled to remove his body through the difficult passages. Analysis showed a chin cup strap would have prevented this death. Vortex Springs Incident. On 12th of April 1980, Vortex Springs in Florida was packed with divers. 4 friends from Texas entered the water-filled cave together. Point Tyner, Johnny Swan, and Martin B. Skaggs were 24, and Bug D. Neal was 23. They descended through crystal-clear water into limestone passages. At 250 feet from the entrance, they reached a stop sign. This was the farthest point recreational divers should go. The 4 decided to continue anyway. They attached a thin line like twine as their own guideline back. They kept going deeper, about 100 feet beyond the stop sign. At some point, they checked their air and realized they'd used more than expected. Time to turn around. They reached for the thin line to follow it back. That's when things went wrong. The line got wrapped around someone's equipment, and when they tried to free themselves, it pulled tighter. The others moved to help, but the line wrapped around more divers. All 4 became tangled. The line looped around arms, twisted around legs, caught on equipment. Their thrashing kicked up silt and visibility deteriorated. Panic spread. Their air was deep in the red zone with maybe 10 minutes left. When they failed to return, specialized rescue divers were called. Johnny Manuel entered the cave and found all 4 dead. Manuel said, "They were in about as big a mess as I've ever seen. The thin line was everywhere, wrapped all over them. The most disturbing detail was that none had used their knives. Every diver had a knife for exactly this situation, but all 4 knives were still sheathed, unused. The panic overwhelmed them so completely they didn't think to cut themselves free." Bueno Fonteno Cave Incident. On the 14th of December 2024, 9 cave explorers entered Bueno Fonteno Cave System near Bergamo, Italy. The team was led by 32-year-old speleologist Ottavia Piana. She had been rescued from this same cave 17 months earlier after breaking her leg. The team descended 4 kilometers from the surface into uncharted territory. At approximately 4:30 p.m., Piana was testing what seemed like a solid ledge. The rock cracked and gave way beneath her feet. She plummeted 5 meters through darkness and slammed into the limestone floor. Her teammates reached her and found a nightmare scene. Her left knee was twisted at an impossible angle. She had multiple facial fractures and broken ribs. She was going into shock. All they could understand was, never again, never again. 4 kilometers of treacherous passages separated them from the surface. The strongest member made a desperate solo run to the surface. He reached it at 8:20 p.m., exhausted. The Italian Alpine and Speleological Rescue Corps was called. The first rescue teams reached Piana at 8 a.m. the next day, nearly 16 hours after the accident. She was secured to a rescue stretcher. Teams of 6 rescuers worked in coordinated movements. Every 90 minutes, they paused for evaluation and team rotation. By the 3rd day, they encountered a blocked passage. Rescuers used small explosive charges to clear it. Piana's condition deteriorated after 3 days underground. Her body temperature was dropping despite thermal blankets. On December 17th, coordinators accelerated the operation with fresh teams. On December 18th at 6 a.m., rescue teams emerged carrying Piana into dawn light. She had traveled 4 kilometers over 4 days. 159 volunteers had worked around the clock. She was immediately transported to a hospital. After treatment, her first words were that she would never enter a cave again. Paradise Springs Cave Incident. In September 1996, 2 recreational divers went to Paradise Springs in Marion County, Florida. These weren't professional cave divers, but open water divers with only basic scuba certification. Open water divers are trained for oceans or lakes where you can swim directly to the surface. Cave diving is completely different and requires specialized training and equipment. The 2 divers made their first critical error before entering entering the water. They decided to explore the underwater cave without a guideline. In cave diving, a guideline is a rope that leads back to the entrance. Without a guideline, you can become lost in an underwater maze with no way out. But these two divers didn't understand this fundamental safety principle. They entered Paradise Springs without any form of navigation aid. They relied only on their ability to remember the route back. The divers descended into the cave system, going deeper and deeper. They reached a depth of 148 feet, far inside the cave system. They were far from any natural light and completely dependent on artificial lighting. At 148 feet deep, they were in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. Then disaster struck in the form of a silt-out. Silt-outs occur when sediment on the cave floor gets stirred up by movements. This creates a cloud of particles that reduces visibility to absolute zero. The two divers caused a massive silt-out at 148 feet deep. The clear water was suddenly replaced by thick silt, making navigation impossible. In zero visibility, the male diver became separated from his partner. Losing contact with your dive buddy in darkness is a nightmare scenario. The male diver began searching frantically for a way out without a guideline. He was essentially swimming blind through an underground maze. In his desperate search, the diver made a fatal error. He attempted to squeeze through what he thought was a passage out. Instead, he wedged himself into a small crack in the cave wall. Once stuck in this tight space, he couldn't move forward or backward. He was 148 feet underwater in complete darkness, trapped in a rock crevice. Meanwhile, his diving partner saw him disappear into the silt cloud. She witnessed what appeared to be a cave collapse. She believed her partner was crushed and made the decision to surface for help. When emergency responders arrived about an hour later, they organized a cave rescue. Professional cave diving rescue teams entered following proper protocols. They laid guidelines behind them and worked to locate the missing diver. The rescue team found the trapped diver wedged in a small crevice. However, their initial attempts to extract him were unsuccessful. They called in the specialized NSS Cave Diving Section Recovery Team. When this elite team investigated, they discovered what had actually happened. The cave had not collapsed as the female diver believed. The trapped diver, probably running low on air, convinced himself he couldn't get free. In absolute panic, he released his diving harness and backed out of the crevice. He then began a free ascent, swimming toward the surface, holding his breath. A free ascent from 148 feet without equipment is extremely dangerous. The tragic irony is that by releasing his harness, he had actually freed himself. If he had remained calm and waited, rescue teams might have extracted him. But panic drove him to make decisions that turned survival into death. Center of the Earth Cave Incident. On January 10, 1990, 3 people entered a lava cave in Hawaii for a relaxing sauna experience. The cave near Route 137 in Hawaii's Puna district was known as Nature's Underground Spa. It had hot water pools and temperatures that reached 96 degrees from ancient volcanic activity. Rodney Armour, 55 years old, was visiting with his wife Jo and friend Mauve Pfizer. The 3 arrived at the cave entrance in a natural sink, dropping 11 feet from ground level. At the bottom was the entrance to what locals called the center of the Earth Cave. The cave's entrance was immediately challenging with a narrow descending tube. You had to crawl through a tunnel with rock pressing from all sides. Once through that constriction, the cave opened up significantly into larger passages. The cave system was extensive, as large as a city block with many side passages. The heat was intense at 96 degrees with high humidity from hot water pools. Rodney, Jo, and Mauve began exploring using only flashlights with no specialized equipment. They had no ropes, helmets, backup lighting, or communication devices. At some point during exploration, Rodney became separated from his wife and Mauve. In the large cave with numerous side passages, he took a wrong turn. For Rodney, being alone in the intensely hot environment was immediately stressful. Instead of staying put and calling out, Rodney began making desperate choices. In his panicked state, he started moving deeper into the cave system. He was no longer thinking logically about navigation or safety. Each turn he took pushed him further from the main routes. The passages Rodney chose were getting narrower and more restrictive. Instead of recognizing this as a warning, his panicked mind pushed forward. Eventually, Rodney found a particularly narrow passage angling downward diagonally. Experienced explorers would avoid such passages, especially when alone. But Rodney's panic had overtaken his rational thinking completely. He began squeezing himself into the narrow diagonal constriction. As he wedged in, he quickly realized he had made a terrible mistake. The passage was barely wide enough with solid rock pressing from all sides. He couldn't turn around, couldn't back out, and couldn't move forward. He was effectively trapped in a stone coffin angled downward. The psychological impact of being wedged was catastrophic. Complete panic set in as his breathing became rapid and shallow. His heart rate skyrocketed and he experienced a full-blown panic attack. He was hyperventilating in the hot, humid air while his body overheated. His mind was consumed with the terror of being buried alive. Meanwhile, Jo and Mauve realized Rodney was missing and called out for him. But in the cave with branching passages and echoes, their voices never reached him. After searching as long as they dared, they exited to call for help. At 2:30 p.m., they reported Rodney missing to emergency services. The rescue operation was urgent and incredibly challenging in the extreme heat. Professional rescue teams organized searches in 20-minute shifts to prevent heat exhaustion. They systematically searched the cave system following proper protocols. When rescuers finally found Rodney, the scene was tragic. He was wedged deep in the narrow diagonal passage head down. It was immediately clear that Rodney had died from cardiac arrest. By 4:15 p.m., they had successfully removed his body from the cave. Sierra Nevada Cave Incident. During the summer of 1990, cave explorers surveyed a cave system in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. The group had spent hours underground working through various sections with surveying equipment. By the time they headed for the entrance, they were physically exhausted. The exit route took them to where an underground stream descended to a lower level. Rather than following the water, the group proceeded along a narrow canyon passage. Derek High was the last one in line as they walked through the narrow passage. As Derek walked, he noticed something unusual about the floor ahead. There was a section where the surface appeared lower, like a dip in the ground. The floor looked somewhat fragile, but also seemed solid enough to walk on. The floor wasn't bedrock, but a thin layer of debris over a vertical crevice. The crack dropped straight down to the stream 35 feet below. As Derek stepped forward, putting his full weight on what he thought was solid ground, disaster struck. Without any warning, the floor completely disappeared beneath his feet. Derek suddenly found himself falling into a pitch-black void. His neck caught on the edges of the crevice opening. Derek's entire body weight was suddenly being supported by his neck alone. He was suspended in the vertical shaft by his neck, with his body hanging below. The pain was excruciating and the pressure on his neck was enormous. Then the situation got worse as rocks and debris started falling. Rocks wedged around Derek's neck, piling against his trapped head and shoulders. Derek threw his arms outward against the crevice walls. The shaft was narrow enough that he could reach both walls. Using a technique called chimneying, Derek pressed against both walls with all his strength. By pushing hard against the walls, he took the crushing pressure off his neck. His neck slowly loosened up, but the crevice walls started collapsing again. More debris cascaded down from above like a deadly waterfall. The falling debris pushed Derek downward, forcing him deeper into the shaft. Derek kept slipping further down with only his arm pressure preventing a fatal fall. Then a large piece of debris slammed into his shoulder. For a split second, he lost his grip and dropped several more feet. Derek was now 15 feet deep inside the vertical shaft. His arms were already shaking from the constant strain. Once his muscles gave out completely, he would fall to his death below. The other spelunkers heard the catastrophic collapse behind them. They found a gaping hole where solid ground should have been. When they shined lights down, they saw Derek wedged 15 feet below. His arms were visibly shaking, and it was clear he couldn't hold much longer. The group quickly retrieved rope from their equipment. When the rope reached Derek, they told him to tie it around his torso, but Derek's arms were the only thing keeping him from falling. If he released pressure to work with the rope, he would fall. He quickly released both arms and grabbed onto the rope. He plummeted a few inches, but managed to get a good grip. Through desperation and willpower, Derek looped the rope around his torso. The others told Derek to try climbing while they pulled from above, but Derek was utterly exhausted and his muscles wouldn't respond. He looked up and shook his head. They would have to pull him up. The group positioned themselves around the opening and began pulling on the count. Derek was essentially dead weight, unable to assist in his own rescue. After several minutes of intense effort, Derek's head appeared at the edge. With a final coordinated heave, Derek was hauled over the edge to solid ground. Against all odds, Derek had survived a situation that should have killed him. The group marked the dangerous crevice with clear warnings for future explorers.